don't know how many other people are gonna join in.
I think I only saw one student who was supposed to join.
All right, so let me open up my browser here. So let's see. You see my man, that's dumb. It only lets me show like one browser. All right, just give me a second.
What browser is this?
Can you see this?
Yeah.
So you can see the speed tree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is Opera GX.
Oh yeah, I've heard of it.
So all right. The thing about foliage or trees and stuff like that is there's like not really many people actually model like trees
Mm-hmm.
in games or in film or anything like that anymore because there's a few like really good apps out there that will do it for you. Like Speed Tree is one in particular, and they make a speed tree for movies and they make a speed tree for for games, and it's just kind of like this procedural modeling um, thing. It's really cool. Um, if you get a chance to check it out, I would definitely recommend it. And I believe there's like an educational, yeah. So there is like a learning edition here you can get where you just can't export anything, but if you just want to learn how to use it, you can use that and then just pay. If you want to export stuff out, you can just pay $20 and cancel and export all your files out. But it's a really cool program, and I feel like this is what we're going to talk about in Maya, the paint effects. This is kind of what paint effects was trying to be whenever it was created. But it's just one of those things where because no one ever uses it anymore, there's better things out there. They they don't update it. So it hasn't been updated in like a decade. So it's kind of old technology. But if you're really wanting to get into like modeling trees and foliage and stuff like that, the speed tree is kind of the industry standard for that stuff. Yeah, I say a lot of people don't model trees anymore uh, from scratch, but they may still model something like if they want something very specific, like say they're making a tree like the I can't remember what it's called, but like the ancestral trees with the face on it in Game of Thrones. If they're doing something like that, then they may actually model it from scratch, but most likely they're going to start from something like this. The other thing that's out there that a lot of people are using now is called Megascans. So this is the Megascans website, and this is something you can actually get for free through the Unreal Engine. So if you sign up for the Unreal Engine, you can get all this stuff for free. This isn't really trees. They do have a lot of plants here, so they do have some trees. I think the trees things is kind of new, but basically what this is they go out into the field and actually like scan the leaves of the trees, and they build these really hyper realistic trees, and you can use them. And again, it's if you have the Unreal account where you get Unreal for free, you get free access to this. So it's a lot of really high quality assets um, that you can use if you want, a tree or a plant or something like that. And again, no one really models this stuff anymore because you can't really match the quality of the actual like scans, and they just use mega scans, or they do it procedurally with something like SpeedTree, which is specific to modeling trees and plants and stuff like that. But if you want to kind of dabble in Maya, let me change my screen here again. You have paint effects. So again, paint effects is like one of these things that I feel like it was meant to be the thing that people would use to create things like trees and bushes and grass and stuff like that, but it just kind of it fell by the wayside and never really got updated. But you can still kind of make passable things with it in Maya, and it's kind of fun to play around with, to be honest. But just to see some examples here, if you go to your this is going to be in your generate tab. So if you go to generate and go down to get brush, so you have this paint effects menu here, go to get brush. It'll bring up your content browser and you have a lot of things in here that you can kind of play around with. So and this is all procedural stuff. It's kind of like a mix of procedural, and it also has some textures assigned to it. So there's cities. I've never really found a use for like some of this stuff, but you can kind of click through it and see that's kind of really weird hands. But you have some plants, you have flowers, cheeseburgers. There's some grasses. Now, grasses like this is actually something that that's kind of practical. You could use this to create a patch of grass and then distribute it with mash.
Hey, Glenn, are you streaming Maya right to Discord?
Yep.
When you do that, we can't see the paint effects box window.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
How do I
just share your screen?
Share my screen.
Yeah. You do the same window, but then click on screens. There's a tab for screens, a tab for applications.
I don't see it. It says screen share, change screens. Okay, I got it. All right, that's going to make my life a lot easier.
I don't know why it's functionally like that. Yeah. It's probably for games.
It kind of makes sense because you don't want to accidentally click on something and expose it if you're streaming.
Yeah, true enough. Yeah, true enough.
All right, so you can see it now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so yeah, so there's all kinds of stuff in here that you can kind of mess around with. The grasses, like I said, are actually kind of practical. You can use these and make a little grass patch and then distribute that with mash if you want. There is trees as well. So you have some trees in here that you can just use as a starting point if you want. The difference between trees and trees mesh, anytime you see mesh at the end, I think there's some for like flowers and flower mesh. Just the flowers is going to be just using like planes with textures mapped to them. But if you go to the mesh, then it's actually going to be a model. So those flower petals are actually going to be modeled out for you. But so let's just go to trees mesh and like grab a tree here.
Are all of them like high poly?
No. They're pretty low. I mean, considering it depends on what you'd consider high poly, but they're all fairly low. And some of them are higher than others. So, like you'll see oak, white, leafy, heavy. So that's going to be a lot more polys than like the medium one. And some of these are new, so I feel like they have kind of added some things over the years, like the palms are kind of new. I don't remember seeing them in there years ago. And the thumbnails have been updated, but for the most part, this is all old stuff. But anyway, say we go and grab like this maple here. If I just middle mouse drag that into my scene, it will activate my paint effects brush. And so you just kind of paint those in there and you get a bunch of trees.
Wow, just like that.
Yep, just like that. And I'll show you guys how to like do something from scratch too. But the real problem here is that the shaders that are connected to these things are really old. So if we were to look at, I don't even know how I would get to the shader. Let's go to the hypershade. Yeah, so it doesn't even have the shaders listed. So typically what you'd want to do if you wanted to render this, like this isn't going to really render in Arnold. Right? So just like nothing shows up if I try to render that in Arnold. I could probably render it in Maya software, but I'd need to add, a software light. So I'm not even going to bother. So typically what you'd want to do with this, if you wanted to render this out, is you would convert it to polys. So right now it's just sort of like it's like this procedural curve stroke right now. So it's not really very useful if you want to actually render this in Arnold. So you would need to convert this to polygon. So you'd go to create, modify. Where is it at? Modify, convert, and then you go to paint effects to polygons, and you'd want quad output. So make sure you check that quad output, and then just hit convert. And that's going to go through and convert all of those procedural strokes to polygons. If you look in the group here, you can see that you basically have like a trunk here and leaves. And the really cool thing about this is that it has UVs, so you can apply a texture to it. So if I went to my texture editor, you'd see that it has really simple UVs to it. So I could apply like a tree bark texture to this and it would apply it, straight up the trunk. And then same for my leaves here. They're going to have, you can actually see the texture they have applied to that in this case. But so if we were to render this now in Arnold, we're not really getting much there. It's just kind of black polygons. I might chug a little while I'm rendering. I do have a decent graphics card, so a brand new one actually. So hopefully I don't chug too much. But you guys let me know if I'm chugging.
Did you get a 4090?
No, I got a 3070 Ti.
Oh, that's the one I have. No, I have the regular 3070. How's that performance been?
It's pretty good, especially with the denoiser turned on, the optics denoiser. It's pretty good. So the reason, just to go off topic a little bit, the reason I didn't get the 4090, I really wanted to, or at least a 3090. I was considering a 3090 as well, but I'd have to buy a new power source. I didn't want to have to buy a new power source, so the 3070 was the highest I could go without needing to buy a new power source.
No, I'm right there with you, man. I've been stifling my upgrade because of my PSU as well.
But you can bet on my next build, it'll have the best card you can buy in it.
That thing's bigger than an Xbox.
Yeah, it's huge. Even like before I had the 2060 Super in this, Even going from the 2060 to 3070, there's a 3070, there's a huge jump in size.
Yeah.
So yeah, getting back to the paint effects here, the issue with these are the materials. So the materials here are basically useless. If we were to look in the Hypershade and see, now we can actually see our materials in here. And this is it's a Phong shader. So both of these are Fongs. And that's actually a ramp shader, which is weird. But shaders don't really work the way they used to. Like, no one ever uses Fongs anymore. Everyone uses the standard surface material for everything. Now you could try to rebuild this. So if we were to just look at this Phong shader, you can see that there's not much to it here. You have this ramp shader that's just going into the color, and that's pretty much it. So you could go as far as to, like, say, just do tab and let's make a new like standard surface material. I just plug that into the base color. And then let's see, this was I think this is our tree trunk material. So we could just select that main tree trunk thing and then right click. Maybe we have to do it up here. Right click, assign material to selection. And that will get that. So now it has an actual standard surface material applied to it, and it may render a little bit better. We try to render it. So it is rendering a little bit better, but it's still pretty dark. The leaves are always going to be a little bit more of a setup because there's an alpha channel usually involved. So like if we were to look at the leaf material here, you can see that there's actually a lot more going on there with that. So we could, redo the material, rebuild the material. That's probably more complicated than what Cameron is looking to do. But it is possible if you just wanted to rebuild the material. So it becomes a lot easier if you're doing something like grass, because that's a pretty simple shader that's not going to have anything complicated to it. But for these trees and stuff, to really make them usable, you have to completely rebuild the material, which is just a pain in the butt, unless you're really serious about doing it. Now you could easily just, if you really wanted to, since in this class that you're inquiring about, everything's really simple. So you could, if you wanted to, just apply a very basic shader to this. So we could just do a standard surface. And just do like a brown material for the tree trunks. And probably increase the roughness quite a bit. Let's make it a little less saturated. And then for the leaves, you could just do like a leafy green material. And then that's going to give you somewhat of a decent render. Right? It's not like super highly accurate, because if we get really close in here, all these leaves are just planes. But if you wanted something just really quick that kind of looks, somewhat realistic or stylized from a distance, this is very easily a stylized tree, then you could do that. So if you just want some really quick trees to put in your scene, you could, um, yeah, you could just pop out some paint effects trees and do them that way. Now, it's gonna get, if I were doing this to prepare to bring it into Mash, um, let's back up here a little bit. So just going back to generate, get brush, go down to trees mesh, and let's grab a different one this time. We'll just grab this medium oak. So again, just middle mouse that, drag that into your scene. And then for some reason, some of them are very tiny, some of them are really big. So if I do that, we get a very tiny tree. If you hold down B, you can increase your brush size. So some of them is just going to give you one tree like that, and some of them, like the other one we had, would just give you like a line of trees, like these maples here. Can give you a line of maple trees like that. So I would recommend, if you're going to do this where you're preparing to bring this into Mash, I would just do one tree at a time. And that way it's, if you want like 3 or 4 of them, it's in the center of the grid. You would then convert this to polygons. So that, again, that's under modify, convert paint effects to polygons. And then you can assign your simple textures to it. So I think it's going to be standard surface 3 for the tree trunk, standard surface 4 for the leaves. Right. So I would select both of these and freeze transforms, delete the history on them. And at that point, once the history is deleted, you can delete their original strokes. And kind of just move this as close to the center of the grid as you get it, and move the pivot point in the center. I like to put the pivot point a little bit above, just so my tree isn't floating when I use it in Mash. And then I can just, actually, let's combine these together first. So mesh combine. And then I'm going to move my pivot point down. So again, delete the history on that. And now that's basically ready for Mash, and it's going to have a very, very simple materials on it, and it's going to render, somewhat decently. It's not photorealistic or anything, but if you just wanted a stylized tree, there's your nice stylized tree for your scene. Now, let's talk about like possibly doing something like this from scratch with paint effects, because I think it's kind of fun to mess around with paint effects just from scratch. So what you want to do is just grab just the paint effects tool, and maybe even go in here and reset it. So reset tool. And just paint a line. See, it's not really, it's still the old tool that I had there. So let me figure out how to reset template brush. I think that's what we want to do. Yeah. So if you're starting from scratch and you do paint effects, you should just be looking at like a black line here that gets painted, like just like a black tube. And for some reason, it keeps that maple name on it, so you can change that if you want. I'll be honest, it's been a while since I've messed with paint effects, so I have to sort of get my bearings again. So I think most of your customizing is going to be in this this node right here, which in this case it's just Maple 3. But if you're starting from scratch, for some reason it just keeps that same name. You could probably come in here and just change this to like basic stroke. But so you have two nodes here. These are where you're going to make most of your changes. You're not going to change a lot here. You do have a display quality you can edit, but most of your customizing of your paint effects is going to take place in this this brush stroke here. So yeah, brush type. We right off the bat want to change that to mesh. And then we can come down here and look at some different things. Let's see. I usually like to skip down to tubes. This is where most of your settings are going to be, right here in this tubes tab. And so we want to just right off the bat turn tubes on. Now we get something that looks, you know, more like grass than anything else. So after you turn tubes on, you have this creation tab, you have a growth tab. And inside this growth tab, you have branches, twigs, leaves, flowers, buds, so on. So we can, so let's just look at some of these settings up here. So obviously you have global scale. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's going to make it bigger, smaller. Brush profile. So brush width. Now this isn't controlling these individual grass things, this brush profile setting. This is controlling our original stroke that we laid down. So that original thick line. So if we increase our brush width, it's spreading those out this way. So it's making that brush stroke wider. So you can edit this a little bit. It's not going to do much for you. Yeah, twist. Twist is something that we may come back to at some point. Your mesh here. So this is basically going to control your how detailed your paint effect strokes are. So if we increase this, we can see that it's increasing the radial edges. So we're getting more radial detail. If we want to increase the sort of vertical details, I think that's going to be somewhere else, not there. Probably going to be in our tubes setting. So let's jump down to tubes, go to creation. Yeah, so tubes per step, this is going to just increase or decrease. So if I'm doing something like a tree here, I'd probably want to start with a fairly low number, especially if I'm distributing them with mash, right? Because I don't need a ton of them. I only need like a handful of them. And then this is just going to change the randomization of them. Start tubes is going to change just how many you have at the very beginning. So say you wanted to do like a tree with a bunch of, like a bunch of trunks coming out. You can increase the number of start tubes and you're just going to get a bunch of trunks right there at the very beginning. segments. So this is going to increase your vertical details. You can see as we increase or decrease that, we're going to get more vertical detail. Now you're not seeing much of it at this point because we basically just have a tube. There's not much detail to it, but we'll jump back and forth and kind of mess with that a little bit as we go. Length, min and max. So this is, a random. Your tubes here are going to be random between these two values. So length min, they're going to be possibly smaller. Length max, they're going to be possibly bigger. So like, for example, if I think this guy is just too small, I'll increase my length minimum. And it's going to bring up the size of that. Tube width. So if I want to make the base wider, the top thinner. So if I want to taper it off like that. Width random. So that's just going to randomize the width. And so on. Now I do want to change. I'm not sure if it's in which setting it is, but I do want to change these so they're kind of just going straight up and down. And again, it's been a while since I've messed with PaintFX, so you may have to bear with me. But it may be a setting we get later. Kind of remember that being higher up here somewhere though. All right, anyway, we'll keep moving. We'll find it eventually. With scale, so this is where you can start to do some really neat things with. So if this is our tree trunk here, we can start to do some really cool things with our width scale. So we have this little graph here that we can start editing. So if I want my tree trunks to kind of have a shape like that to them, where they kind of taper off. Now I need to come back up here and mess with my width 1 and width 2 and probably make them around the same size to really get that look that I want. So you can really control how these things look. You can do some pretty wild things with them too. If you wanted to make like some alien plants of some sort. All right, so this right here is what I was looking for. So your tube direction, so your elevation min max and your azimuth, this is going to sort of straighten things out a little bit. So I believe we want this to be at a value of 1, and those will be straight up. You can kind of, if you want to randomize them a little bit, you can bump them down to lower than 1. But this is where you're going to control their position here. And at any point, if you don't like the randomization of these, like if these two are too close together, you can go back and adjust the seed, which is over here. So the seed setting. So anytime you see the term seed, it just means it's going to be a different randomization. So you can kind of play with that until you get sort of the randomization that you want. So something like that. So I only need 3 trees, so that's all I want. All right, and then we have this growth section. So this is where we're going to start adding things like branches. So if we turn branches on, we get branches. Now if I look at the branches in here, then we can start editing the branches. So I'm just going to jump down to this middle branch setting. most trees have a middle branch. Like pine trees, they have a middle branch. So they have one branch that goes straight up in the air. Um, trees like oak trees, they don't have a middle branch, so they're going to be a little bit more along the lines of this. Number of branches. So the more you have there, the more branches you're going to get. Branch dropout. So this is just going to kind of drop them out or randomize, like, so they don't all have the same exact number of branches. This is controlling where they're split. So you can see that the higher this value, the higher the value, the lower down they're split, or it seems like these are different than those. Split angle. So it's going to just change the angle of the split. Split size decay. So as they get smaller, or as they split, they do get smaller. Split bias, so on. So, and then you have your twigs option. So if you turn twigs on, you get this whole other thing here. So it's just like branches on branches, basically. And you have all kinds of, probably want to drop their length quite a bit. So, yeah, and then you have leaves, flowers, buds, all these things that you can add to them. Now, below this, you have behavior. This is where it's going to start to get kind of fun to mess around with, because you're going to start introducing all kinds of different displacements to them. So you have displacement here. So we can start putting some noise in there. Wiggle frequency. And so say we do something crazy like this, right? Or say I want to start adding some curl to it. And I notice that in some areas it's kind of freaking out on me like this. I need to go back up and probably add more segments. So as I add more segments, I'm capable of having a little bit more detail in there. But just use it as you see fit. It can get a little crazy. Some of these will actually animate. So just depending if that's what you want. In most cases, you're going to be converting these to polygons. So you're not going to be using them to animate anyway. But you have, spiral, bend, and do some really neat things with them. So it's, it's kind of fun to mess around with these and just see what you can create. This is kind of neat if you have roots, or you're doing something with roots or vines or something like this. You can actually make it attract. I don't really have a surface attached to it, but you can make it sort of attached to a surface if you want. Gap size, I'm not really sure what that does. But yeah, we can turn on leaves now. If we go back up here and turn on leaves, it's going to create some really big leaves. Remember that we're kind of working in a very small scale here. Like our grid is like 5 inches. So we're making trees that are like a foot tall. So, leaves in cluster. So we'd want to come in and right off the bat, probably make our length smaller on our leaves and And do you have a width scale, a leaf width scale? So if you wanted to give them like a leafy profile, like that. You can also set these points to smooth interpolation. And you can also set them to spline. That's probably better. But yeah, so then you can give it like an actual leafy shape. If you want it to have more details, there is a setting for that somewhere. Might be, where is that? There is a setting to change the number of polys you have in here somewhere. Yeah, right here under leaf curl. So you have leaf segments. So leaf curl is this is a cool one. So this is currently flat, so there's no curl. But as soon as you add a point, so it adds every little point in here, you're gonna have a division. So if you do something like this and start to curl your leaves, see that they're curling up a little bit. Now, ideally, what you'd want to do with this is say you're planning to, if you're just doing something stylized and you're going to add just a basic material to these leaves, it's fine to come in here and kind of play with them and give them a curl. You know, you can come in and do the opposite if you want. So if you're just going to do something very, very basic with them, it's okay to come in here and play with these things. If you're going to map a texture to them, which is something that you would feasibly do because they actually have UVs, so it'd be really easy to map a texture to these. If that's what you're going to do, I would recommend just leaving them flat because they have UVs. So if they have any sort of bend like this to them, it's going to warp the UVs. So if you were going to apply a texture to these, you'd want these to be basically square. If that makes sense. So that way, whenever you apply your texture to them, it's not going to warp the texture. And then you can even bring the segments down because you don't really need them. So you could just do something like that for your leaves. And, you know, that's your, just apply a texture to them. So let's see. I want to make them smaller. And I want much more of them. So most, like, I would really recommend looking at like a branch, right? So if you're really into like creating trees and stuff, and this goes for if you're using that program SpeedTree to create things too, because it's going to have a lot of very similar settings here. So definitely look at reference, right? So if we look at one of these guys. Right, if we look at this, we can see that it's got these little clusters of leaves. It looks like there's 3 leaves in a cluster, and then, you know, it's got another little cluster of leaves on top of that. So most leaves, I feel like, 3 or 4. It's going to have like a cluster of 3 or 4 leaves, and that's it. So having leaves in cluster 3 or 4. We could definitely randomize the size quite a bit. But I think the one thing that you'll notice once you come in here and start really working on these and start adding your leaves is you'll notice that it still looks pretty sparse. And no matter how many leaves that you come in and start adding to this, right? So we can come in and add more. It's still going to look fairly sparse. So the one thing that you actually need more of is not leaves, you need more branches. So or twigs. So you want to come in and start adding a lot more twigs, maybe some more branches as well. And now you're getting something that actually looks a little bit more like a tree. Now, sometimes you're going to get trees that has, stuff like this that just looks bad. You could try just jumping back here and changing the seed again and see if you'll get something that you like a little bit better. Like that's not going freaking out so much on us. But that's basically all there is to it. Now, again, we can go back up and just jump around here. And, if we wanted to add some flowers, there's some giant flowers. So we need to come down and come to flowers and decrease the size drastically. Again, they're popping in there so huge because we're working on a pretty small scale. So now we can see the little flowers in there. And probably not so many, right? A tree isn't going to have that many flowers on it. You guys still there?
Yep.
Still here.
All right.
It was Jackie chickened out.
There she is.
Okay, you know what? I retract my earlier statement about Jackie chickening out. She's back.
So yeah, and like at the end of the day, the really cool thing about this is that if you want to just apply basic materials to it, you can just apply basic materials to it. But it also has UV. So if if we were to then come in and say we're finished making our trees, if you were to then come in and go to modify, convert paint effects to polygons, you could attempt to rebuild the shader, or you could just completely make a new shader. So you could go to a website like textures.com, right? Textures. And can we browse without registering? Library. I feel like there's going to be a nature, leaves. So you could just map one of these leaves or a few different of these leaves to that leaf material and just make your own leaf material. Same with the tree trunk. You could probably go and find trees. I don't know if it's going to give us like a texture. I don't see any that's just like a tree texture. Maybe bark, branches. No, I don't see anything. But I mean, go outside and take a picture of a tree, make a texture out of it, and apply that to your tree. So that's the one really cool, powerful thing about these paint effects is that they do have UVs already. You know, very basic, just straight up and down UVs. So if you wanted to assign a repeatable, tileable texture to it, you could. And you know, all of your leaves have UVs as well. So in this case, it's just a basic ramp applied to those. But if you wanted to map an actual image of a leaf to those, you could. So yeah, so that's paint effects. It's a lot of fun to play around with. You know, I kind of wish they would come in and at least update the shaders to be like standard surface materials, but I understand that's probably a lot of work to ask Autodesk to do. Um, but if you don't mind taking the time to like rebuild the shaders, or just if you just want them for something simple, simple materials, you could do that. Again, this isn't going to render in Arnold because it's sort of like an obsolete material. So it's trying to render something there. I think it's just getting the shadows. But it's not going to render in Arnold because it's using like an old Fong material. So you'd need to go in and rebuild the materials to really get that to work. But again, you can also just um, assign a basic material to it. So I could come in here and say, just assign a standard surface, make that brown, grab my leaves, assign a standard surface, make that green, grab my flowers, make those red, and now that's going to actually render. So again, it's not hyper real. It's not, you know, technically accurate, but if you just want something stylized, it's definitely cool to do.
Yeah, that still looks pretty cool. And it looks like it would fit with our project.
Yeah, because what you're working on is pretty basic and stylized as it is.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, it's pretty good. And say you want, let me just show you the grass thing really quick, because that's something that I think is very useful. Say you want to use paint effects to just like make a basic clump of grass. We'll go to get brush, grass, grasses. And just do like, just want basic grass. So probably just like field grass is what you would use, or yeah, we could try using this Bermuda grass, see how that looks. That's actually giving us a mesh, so we don't really want that. Let's try this one. Yeah, that's not what we want. Basically, just want, when it comes to grass, because it's going to be duplicated so much, there's going to be so much of it, you kind of want it to be efficient in terms of not having a ton of polygons to it. So I think the one I generally would use is just this grass clump. Yeah, so that's just going to give me some grass planes like that. So I'd probably make a clump like this, just do a little circle, and then come in here and go down to our settings. You just want a lot less of it. I don't want it to be that dense, basically. Maybe you want it to be a little bit wider and less dense. So I would come down to probably tubes. And decrease the tubes per step so there's not as much of it. So maybe something like that. And then I'd want to make it a little bit wider. And have it taper off a little more. So I'd probably do something like this. Make 3 or 4 different grass clumps like this. And then we can go to modify, convert, paint effects to polygons. We could try jumping in and just rebuilding the material really quick so it works. So that's not it. We want the grass. I think it's this one here. That's what we want. So pretty simple. It's just a basic color going into a material. So I can just take this, make a standard surface material. And just plug that into the base color instead. And, I could mess around with like the shininess of it. I think grass is generally pretty shiny. And then we can grab that and assign that material to it. Then I'm going to go and just clean up my scene, delete the history, freeze transformations. It's already pretty much in the center of the grid, so I'm not worried about doing that. I'm just going to take this, delete everything else. I just have my grass here and probably just pull this out of the group too. I can just edit, ungroup. All right, so then I have my grass clump here. Make something a little bit more interesting. Grab my grass clump, make it a mesh. Make it a mesh, distribute, just plug in my plane. Add a lot of it, so like 5,000 maybe, not 100,000, 5,000. That's probably still not enough. Maybe 10,000. Your scene will start to get a little laggy the more you have in here, but then we can come in and add a random node to this. Yeah, you can see that it's definitely getting laggy. And just start randomizing everything. I don't think we want to rotate. I don't think we want to rotate Y. There's one of them we don't want to rotate because we don't want it to be. Actually, I think Y may be the only one we want to rotate because we want it to stay upright. Yeah, so we're just going to rotate Y. Right? Or it's probably easier when you're dealing with this many to knock it down to a lower number to begin with. Just so you can see your adjustments that you're making. All right, so now I can see which axis that they're actually rotating on. And we can mess with the scales a little bit, probably just do uniform scale. If you don't do uniform scale, I would try to keep them kind of around the same value. And now we can bump our value back up. Now we can come in here and get like a cool angle. Using my CPU render, I should be using my GPU. Let me go ahead and change that. So yeah, so we could come in and start tweaking our settings a little bit, our shader a little bit, right? So like grass is typically going to have a little bit of subsurface scattering. We can make the color like a brighter green. So yeah, it's going to start looking, we get that highlight there. So that's going to be something, you know, grass does have some anisotropy to it, which is like stretched highlights. So we could come in and mess with that setting. That's this anisotropy right here on the specular. What's ideal really, instead of doing this in the viewport, is probably to just bring up in a render window. And do this interactively. So if we do that anisotropy, you see your highlights getting thinner right there. So if we want to rotate it around probably 90 degrees, it's going to look a little bit more like grass. So yeah, you can, at this point, if I want like a grassy field or something, it's just a matter of playing around with my settings here. So
for the sake of the project, would it be okay if the grass is like under the house but like not showing? Or
yeah. I mean, like, I don't know about your house, but the grass, I just actually use the weed whacker to trim around my house, but the grass goes right up to the edge of it. So yeah, you could put it could be under the house if you need it to be under the house.
Okay.
But just keep in mind that this will significantly add to your render time.
Yeah.
It's going pretty quick for me, but like I said, I just got a brand new beefy graphics card. And you can do it quite a bit thinner. So if I come in here and bring down my number here, so let's do 5,000 instead of 10,000. I might have to restart the render. No, that's not too bad. But one thing that would help this a lot is just like so we see patches where there's no grass. So one thing that would help this a lot is just to add in a material to my ground, so it's not just gray. So I'd probably do like a greenish brown, darker material. Something like that. That's going to look a little bit nicer. And if you have like, 3 or 4 different grass patches, and maybe each one has a slightly different color to it, it's going to start to look a lot more realistic. Because, I mean, this is just the same grass patch with one same model or same material on everything. So yeah, it's a lot of fun playing around with paint effects. You can, even though they're very outdated and no one really uses them in production or in the industry anymore, I think for like an individual person, if you kind of got the hang of using them, you can do some really cool stuff with it. So they're not completely useless yet. But as I said, for those of you guys who popped in a little late, kind of like the industry standard thing to use for creating trees anymore is SpeedTree, which is used. There's a cinema version and a game version. You can get it for free just to learn. And it's $20 a month if you actually want to export everything. And then the other big thing is Megascans, which is just like this scanned library. So you can just download these assets and use them. And this is free as well if you have an Unreal account. So you get Unreal for free. You get all these Megascans for free. And these aren't just models. So they're models and all of your maps too. So this thing, if I download this, it's going to come with a model. It's going to come with a base color map, a roughness map, probably a normal map as well. So it's going to come with a lot more than just the model. But if creating foliage and creating landscapes with foliage and these scenes, if this is something that you're really into, then I would definitely look into learning how to set up stuff with Megascans and maybe even learn how to use SpeedTree. So
when we use things from Megascans and SpeedTree, like as like for the learning aspect of it, can we still like upload our renders to say those websites where it's like you kind of have your digital portfolio there, or like do you have to have that
yeah,
in your own
so
portfolio?
that's a good question. SpeedTree is when you're creating something with SpeedTree, you're creating something completely original. So you're just using the software to do it. So that's not like you're just downloading a file. You're actually going in and you're making the tree. And I mean, you can use their default trees and stuff, but I think you're kind of not using it to its best potential unless you're like using it to actually make a tree. So in terms of SpeedTree, it's no different than what we were doing with PaintFX. You're going in there and making your own unique tree with it. In terms of Megascans, like if we were to go to ArtStation and go to
ArtStation is owned by the same company that owns Quixel, so I don't think they'll have a problem with it.
No, well, Quixel's owned by Unreal now too, so
yeah, and Epic bought ArtStation. So,
but yeah, if we were to go to like environment, art, games in real time, we'll just look at that. Like all of this stuff is Megascans. Like the building was obviously modeled and textured and all this stuff, but I can put money on the fact that all of those grass, all of that tree is Megascans. As long as you say in your portfolio that this was Megascans, I think it's fine. Like I said, nobody models their own trees from scratch because procedurals can do it way better, and you're not going to be able to match like the quality of Megascans. So, I used to frown upon this, like, oh, you should, model everything yourself. But the fact that it's been adopted by the entire industry and no one's like modeling, their own individual trees, everyone uses this stuff. So I don't see anything wrong with it. Now, if you wanted something very specific, like if we were talking about, I can't remember what these, like the trees from Game of Thrones. These things. So, yeah. So if you wanted something very specific, like a tree with a face on it or something like that, you could model it from scratch. You could also like make something in SpeedTree and then take that into something like ZBrush and then just sculpt it further, sculpt a face on there if you wanted. So it just depends on what you want. If you want something that looks natural and looks authentic, then you're not going to beat something from like SpeedTree or Megascans. If you want something very specific, so if you're trying to make the exact tree that's from like a picture or from a concept art you're following, then yeah, that gets a little bit more tricky, where maybe you want to do it from scratch, or at least maybe you want to start from something from like SpeedTree and then edit it to make it exactly what you want. But yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with using Megascans in your portfolio. A lot of people do it now. What your portfolio is geared towards is important, because you're not, if you have a portfolio full of just these scenes with nothing but Megascans in them, right? Then people are going to obviously know that you didn't model and create all that stuff. So what are you specializing in? What is your portfolio geared towards? What are you trying to get a job in? Is it set dressing? Because that is a thing, right? Like There are jobs out there that's just nothing but set dressing. So you're just taking these assets and you're putting them in a scene, right? So like if someone were like, if you're working for a studio and they're like, make this scene, right? You're probably not going to be modeling anything in this. You're just going to be taking a bunch of assets from Megascans and throwing them in a Maya scene and rendering it out. You may be doing the road, right? You may be like texturing the road, or like you may be modeling like fence posts or little tiny details like that. But as far as the nature goes, that's all going to be from something like Megascans. So I hope that made sense. Anything else you guys want to talk about?
If we have time for it, I still have the issue where I can't put my trees on the origin so that I can set it up for Mash.
Oh, so it's just going to be a matter of moving it to your origin, right? So like if you have an object, this goes for anything. Mm-hmm. So if you have an object, it's like way over here, and the transforms are zeroed, right? That's kind of the situation that you have. So it's just going to be a matter of moving it to the center, back to the center of your grid. So go to like your side view, or like say if this is a tree, I'd want it to be like sitting above the grid a little bit. So, and then in my front view, and then just hit freeze transforms, and that will zero out your transforms again. So yeah, it's just a matter of moving it and clicking that freeze transforms.
Gotcha. Thank you.
If you want to be exact about it, you could turn on grid snapping, which is right here, snap to grid. So then it will actually snap. It's not snapping because my grid, it is snapping, but my grid is so tiny. But if you wanted to be really precise about it, you could just snap it to the grid.
Okay, because when I tried like the modify and then the reset transformations, it also messed up my scaling a bit.
Yeah.
So like my trees like were deformed.
Yeah, so I don't know the exact difference between reset transforms and freeze transforms, but typically you want to use freeze transforms.
Okay.
I think that might be it, as it doesn't affect everything. They kind of have the same settings. But yeah, typically you just want to use freeze transforms to zero out those again. Anything else?
I'm not sure if we talked about this last semester, but like for those of us who want to work in a company that uses their own game engines, like as far as like modeling and scene setting, what sort of other programs would they most be looking for, if not their own engine, like Unity or Unreal?
I would always say Unreal. Unity is certainly the easier one to learn, but Unreal is kind of like the big one that most people use. If they use their own game engines, if they have something very proprietary, they're not going to expect you to know it. But they would want you to have some sort of experience with some game engine. And the thing about Unity in particular is that it doesn't have, or at least to my knowledge, I haven't been into Unity in a while, but it doesn't have like a material editor. like in Maya, you have the hypershade. And in Unreal, you have something very similar. So you can do a lot of things with customizing materials in Unreal. So I would recommend having just some Unreal scenes in your portfolio if you're going for anything involving games. I think it's important to have like some Unreal scenes or just like some stuff, something that insinuates how to use a game engine, how to get in there and set up a scene in a game engine and stuff like that. Even if you're not like necessarily making a game in it, um, I think and a lot of people are doing some really cool just like renders in Unreal, right? So like if we go back to ArtStation, like all this is rendered in Unreal. This isn't like a game that you would walk around in and play, um, because this stuff is way too high poly and it's not going to perform very well. But Unreal is really great for just set dressing and just making these really high quality scenes. The lighting setup in Unreal is really good.
Just to add on to that,
yeah.
they did add a shader editor into Unity. They actually hired the guy who pioneered shader graph in Unreal to make it for him. So it's actually the exact same thing.
Oh,
with some
okay,
extra
cool.
features. So if you're learning how to make shaders in either or, you're basically learning both.
Gotcha.
From what I've heard, the main difference is that like Unity's VR AR stuff is a lot easier to work with. So if you're looking to do like VR AR, learn Unity. But it's a lot of the same stuff as far as like getting things into engine for a modeler or setting up shaders or doing all that kind of stuff.
You're making, I don't know what they're called in Unity, but in Unreal you'd call them like prefabs. So you're like in a game engine, most of this stuff is going to be modular. So you would have kind of like a I don't know an easier way to put it, but you'd have like a Lego set, so to speak, of all these different models, and you would just sort of arrange them in different ways to make stuff like this. So like example of like this house right here, actually this is a perfect example, right? So if we look at something like this, they didn't like model this whole house and then bring it into, like, they didn't model this whole house in Maya and bring it into Unreal. They modeled like parts of it, right? So it's made up of a bunch of different parts that they then took into Unreal and sort of assembled and arranged. So in this case, it looks like maybe they did model the house, but and a lot of games want you to work modularly like that because you can build out these really complex environments by just using the same sort of group of models over and over again. But yeah, I do hear that Unity is much easier learning curve than Unreal. But I think
if you're trying to like script, absolutely. Blueprints are weird.
Yeah.
But it's not that bad once you dig into it. And with blueprints, you don't need to learn how to script. You just need to learn the logic. That's an oversimplification, but like,
Yeah. This is a good example. Like all these wood things on here are just these few objects. So I think if you're going to work for a game studio and do things like environment modeling or set dressing, like knowing modularity, how to model modular is huge. I think having something like this, just like in a game engine, whether it be Unity or Unreal, like I think a company would love to see something like this from a potential hire. Yeah, like this is all mega scans. It's not to say there's not a ton of work that went into this, like assembling and putting everything together. But yeah, for the most part, this is all mega scans. I think Unreal also just implemented some sort of like scan line renderer or like ray trace renderer or something, so you can actually do like high quality renders. That's
Oh,
not
yeah.
just like the real time render.
Yeah, they added their cinematic pipeline.
Yeah,
I used that a lot on my last one. It's really easy too. It's just a pain to set up.
I've downloaded Unreal because I need to I want to get brushed up in it, but I haven't had a chance to mess around with
Yeah,
it at all yet.
I spent my entire mentorship doing Unreal rendering and setup and learning shader graph and all that.
Nice. So yeah, if you guys have any more questions, if not, then I'm gonna go watch some TV
Right on, man.
or play some
I
video
think
games.
I'm all set.
All right, you guys have a good night.
You too, bud.
You too.
See ya. Nice hearing from you.
Bye.
Yep.